Hello, and welcome to this third iteration on a Skyrim level that I'm creating. My name is Nate Blair, and just as a recap of where we were last time, this is the second iteration, or third video, where in the last iteration we were focused on the size of getting the final size of all the rooms correct, as well as getting the space for the most important rooms correct. So we focused a lot on the final room and the second story mechanic, making sure that there was an interesting final encounter for the player, as well as the wife's tomb in her sarcophagus room, and that we use a different set of pieces for that room to really go with her backstory of liking nature. And then we also looked a little bit at the beginning of propping for some of the rooms. So in this iteration, the main focus was really doubling down on props for the dungeon and having majority of all props laid out and ready for the player, as well as the true solidification of the layout of the dungeon, and then beginning to focus on where the player will go for the critical interactions for the dungeon as well. So we enter the dungeon again in this banquet hall, and you may have already noticed that there are some significant changes. This was barren in the last iteration, but we now have most of the props necessary for this room to be complete. So there are banquet tables from the beginning of the hall all the way to the end. There are torches going down the sides. These tables need to be improved, but we have the appetizer, or food food containing tables here on the side. And then I wanted some way to fill this right hand column, so I decided why not just put a couple old casks and a bunch of mead cups over here on the right side. To kind of mix up the terrain, we've also added a few rubble pieces to the set. So there's this big rubble pile, which also is hiding the other important piece of this room, which is this campfire with sleeping bags and a few supplies. So one of the things that we went over in our level design class is that every good dungeon or every good level is telling multiple stories. So the first story here is, of course, that this is a banquet hall for kings and jarls and a place to celebrate their lives. But then there is now the uninvited guests, and so there needs to really be the two stories going on. Here we have the props for the bandits, which seem a little bit out of place compared to these old tables and ruins that we have for the rest that were here since the creation of this room. So there's also the loot scheme is in place. So there's a chest over there that the bandits have brought with them. There's also hidden chests are now placed. So over here there's this rubble that's on the ground, and in the center you can find this hidden chest, which I think I'm going to want to be a locked chest eventually. But again, it's for players that want to explore the entire room, leaving some goodies for them to find. So let's keep going through the dungeon here. Some of the rooms have not changed very much, but I will mention those as we find them. So the next room is the Jarl's fake burial chamber. And again, in the last iteration, this was an unpropped room, so there has been some dramatic changes here as well. You'll notice that there are rugs placed. There's these fine blazers that will have burning flame, eternal burning flames, just as really have a memorial ground here for this Jarl. Tables for small accessories, mostly just filled with filler, a few burial urns, and then really just decorating the Jarl sarcophagus, a little altar, and a few candles as well. Really just making this room feel complete. Again, filling some of the space with and mixing up the space with a little bit of rubble. It's buried this table over on the other side of the room. One significant change I'd like to point out is I have actually removed one room and wing entirely. I wasn't satisfied with how the Jarl's child's sarcophagus room was turning out. It felt kind of bland and boring. It wasn't there weren't the props that I wanted for it to be like an interesting room. So that room has been completely removed. But we've kind of transitioned that into focusing the energy somewhere else, and I'll show where a lot of the time that I spent on that has gone instead. So this is the wife's burial room. There's only been a few changes. Mostly there's more fauna around her sarcophagus, ferns, mushrooms, some lichen on the walls. Really just trying to make the room interesting, colorful. The player can so there's multiple types of loot in dungeons. There's of course coins and treasure, but one way to use I'm utilizing this room is the player can collect the mushrooms and the flowers that are littering the wife's sarcophagus. So this is another type of loot in this dungeon for players that are more interested in resource gathering rather than epic swords or more gold coins, which they don't really need. So this is kind of also a loot room for players that are trying to gather ingredients. Of course, we have the secret hidden chest back there, and then for the secret entrance to the pole chain for the secret entrance to the Jarl's actual burial tomb. I've placed this pillar here, and it's something the player can reach and jump on if they get it right. Ugh. So I think I want to put the pole chain here at the top of this pillar, kind of out of sight. But these rocks are placed to make it so that this is accessible for the player. So they have to be paying attention a little bit to find that pole chain. One thing I want to do in the next iteration is add in enemies, so I can get some actual playtests with people going and get good feedback on how they like the dungeon. And one thing I'll be looking for in that playtest is, are they finding the pole chain? And if not, what are some ways I can guide the player to find it more easily? Maybe through journals or bandits whispering to each other about, that their boss found it over here or something. Yeah, so we're back here in the Jarl's tomb. Let's make our way down the secret passage. Nothing has changed in the servants overnight. I really like the layout of this room. You may notice as we're going through that there are a few pieces that are a little bit out of place. It's as we've made significant changes to some of these rooms. Some of the pieces have started to become mismatched, so just need to harden that in the next iteration as well. Make sure that for a playtest we don't have any of these pieces that are like floating pieces or spaces in the ceiling like this. So this is different from before. The final room was like there's a passageway right here to the final room, and one thing that I've noticed so far in feedback I've gotten just from the layout of the dungeon overall is that this is kind of a dungeon focused on the story, and a few people have pointed out that really gameplay should be the first priority of a video game, and especially an active game like Skyrim. And I know that sounds obvious, but Skyrim it has a lot of lore associated with it, so it can be kind of tempting to really want to create a level that tells a story. But I've decided that there needs to be different types of encounters that the player goes through. So the banquet hall that they go into first is going to be an early combat encounter, and then they're going to reach the Jarl's fake tomb, which will have a little bit of combat, but will primarily be focused on the secret and trying to find the pole chain to reach this section of the dungeon. And then right now we've kind of mocked out this passageway to the final room. In my original sketches, I had a labyrinth that I wanted the player to go through, which seemed a little bit overscoped. But I kind of want to go back to that idea where the labyrinth was supposed to be a puzzle and trap encounter. And I think I can use this space in between the Jarl's fake tomb and this this corridor. You can see the end just there, the far end of this hallway, to kind of wind around a little bit and put a few traps in. Maybe a few guillotines. There's you can put switches on the ground and it'll like flip like a metal spike at the player. So really just like mix in a little bit of combat and a few traps just to give a few different types of encounters to the player. That's one thing that I've noticed in a lot of the dungeons that Skyrim level designers have made is every dungeon has that mixture of encounters. So I'd like to use this space for some traps, which wasn't really anything like that in the previous version. So here we are in the final encounter room. You'll notice that there are a few enemies here already. I'm experimenting with putting a few corpses here on the ground, bandit corpses, implying that there were sacrifices for the necromancer to reach this tomb, and not all of his minions are going to make it out with their full paycheck. It was also pointed out that there were more pews in this room than there were in the official, or the fake slash the common person's the Jarl's fake burial chamber, where the common folk would be paying their respects. So I've removed quite a few of those pews, and then instead this is also going to serve as the burial hall for the Jarl's most important servants. So as the player steps into this final encounter, the necromancer will be at the end of the hallway with the raised Jarl, and then there'll be the trigger when the player enters. A few of these caskets will open, and the player will have to fight maybe the necromancer plus the Jarl, a couple of archers, and then one or two undead as well. So again, something I want to get some people playtesting to just make sure that the ramping of the difficulty for this dungeon is correct. So let's just kind of get these guys up. Right now they don't attack, so kind of just hanging out. Other than that, not a lot has changed in this room, so I think we're just gonna move on from this. This door is now attached for the loop back to the beginning of the dungeon. And so here we are at the treasure room after the player has defeated the Jarl and the necromancer and his minions. So none of the loot is placed yet, but we have all the urns and chests and tables for placing potions and whatnot. Then we go through the secret passage. We loop back around, and then there would be a pull chain right here where that would activate the secret door, and the player can step through. And here we are at the beginning of the banquet hall again. This is the servant's kitchen, which you may remember from the last video. And we are here in the banquet hall again, taking a side entrance. So yeah, this pile of rubble looks like it's floating a little bit. It's unfortunate, but let me know what you think of the layout for the dungeon, if the props all fit, if you feel like there's going to be a good balance of encounters, what the pacing feels like, if there's anything missing. Go ahead and leave those in the comments if there's anything that sticks out to you. I'd love to hear. And thanks